Welcome to our webinar, Life Beyond Your PhD, where we'll be looking at navigating your next career steps after your PhD. So before we get started with our main content, I would just like to introduce us to you today. So I'm Tracy Warbrick. I'm Head of Education and Scientific Communication here at Brain Products. So I'm very happy to be able to bring you this webinar today on a slightly different topic. We are also very lucky to have two experts with us today. So we have two expert panelists. We have Holly Prescott. She's a PhD career specialist, so she's trained in career guidance and has 10 years of experience working with doctoral and postdoctoral researchers. And she's really focused on helping PhD students and early career researchers with their next steps. She's the creator of a very good blog, which we will give you the link to later, called Postgradual. And this has attracted over 62,000 readers from 150 countries. So I think that really shows how valuable Holly's content is. And we also have Matthew Betts with us today. So Matt has spent 17 years in academic research in neuropharmacology and clinical neuroscience before switching to his current role, including a role as principal investigator in Magdeburg. And he's also co-founded and advised on multiple health tech startups. So he has a really interesting background to bring to us. Matt's built a really strong community on LinkedIn where he shares insights on academic and non-academic careers, as well as professional or personal development. And last year he founded MJP Consulting, which has already guided over 80 PhDs and postdocs through their career pivots. So I think you'll agree that our panelists really have a lot of knowledge to share with you today, and I'm really looking forward to the content.
Thanks a lot, Tracy. Yeah, hello everyone. Very pleased to be here with you this morning. As Tracy said, I'm Holly, and I'm a career guidance specialist specialising in working with PhD and postdoctoral researchers. So I'll start by telling you a little bit about me, why I'm here. So I've put a photo of myself up on the screen in my doctoral robes. If you can't see them, the doctoral robes from the University of Birmingham in the UK, where I got my PhD, are delightfully festive. They're this kind of red and rich green colour. The photo shows me very excited in December 2011 to have my PhD all finished, done, dusted. So excited, in fact, that I've got one shoulder of my doctoral hood hanging off my shoulder. I didn't even get dressed properly on the day to go up and shake the VC's hand, looking a little bit dishevelled. But yeah, I was very relieved, happy to be Dr. Prescott, have it all in the bag. And here's a little bit about what I've been doing since. So I did do a PhD. I'm not a scientist, definitely not a neuroscientist. My PhD is in kind of humanities, social sciences, and I finished that in 2011. And through my PhD, I started to realise that I was really interested in working in a university environment, but I wasn't necessarily wedded to my subject area or to research or academic teaching. So I started to explore what other kinds of roles people did in the university by taking a couple of part-time jobs when I was a PhD student. And one of those part-time jobs was helping with postgraduate open days, giving tours and running events, and I really enjoyed that. And doing that part-time job was a great segue for me because that led to a more kind of full-time job pretty much immediately after I finished my PhD, which I did for 3 years, traveling around the UK and Europe, trying to convince people to come to Birmingham to do their master's or their PhD. And when I was doing that role, I started to ask myself big questions, like if I was going to turn this job into my ideal job, what parts of it would I want to keep? And what parts of it would I want to change? And it was in that first job that I realised all the stuff I liked was public speaking, presenting, feeling like I had a role where I was an advisor a mentor or something like that. And the aspects of the role I wasn't that fussed about was the sales aspect of always having to kind of sell one option to people, which was postgraduate study. And I thought, what I'd really like to have the chance to do with these prospective students I'm talking to is to really have a more in-depth conversation with them about what's right for them, and help them actually make that decision. And that was when career guidance raised its head as an obvious option for me. So in 2015, I got a secondment to the university's career service working with master's students. And at the same time, uh, part-time on Saturdays at a local university, I was studying for a professional qualification in career guidance. And all of that experience and all of that professional study culminated in March 2017 when I was hired as a careers advisor at the university, specialising in working with PhD researchers. So it was a sweet spot for me. It let me keep doing the things I enjoyed. And it also used my PhD because I was working with researchers. The fact I'd been through it myself was definitely an asset. As Tracy said, then in 2021, I started Postgradual, which is a blog that tackles some of the big questions about careers post PhD. And I'll pop a link in the chat in a second. And off the back of that, my book, Navigating Careers Beyond Academia, for doctoral and postdoctoral researchers, is fingers crossed coming next year. So the reason why I guess I'm here today is because I have a PhD. I've been through that experience. I experienced the highs and lows of post PhD career transition, um, including some great interview feedback when I first started interviewing for jobs beyond academia. It was definitely a learning curve for me to understand how to kind of articulate myself and my skills in a way that was interesting for other audiences. I'm an example of someone who's changed career post PhD, who's working in an academic adjacent role, so not doing research but supporting researchers. I've studied career guidance in an academic sense. I've got an accredited qualification in it, and have spent 10 years supporting graduate students and researchers with their careers. So that's a little bit about me, why I'm here. My 5 minutes is up. So I will hand over to Matt, I think, to introduce himself next.
Yeah, and thank you, Tracy, for organizing this. So just a little bit about me. So I'm Matt. As Tracy mentioned, I founded MGB Consulting just towards the end of last year, which focuses on health tech consulting and also supporting PhDs, particularly in STEM, with navigating their career path, whether that's in academia or to non-academic careers. But for me, really, it all began. So I've been living in Germany now for over 12 years, but it all began for me in Wales. So I'm from the UK. I studied as a pharmacologist. So I did my undergrad in the University of Bristol, and then I moved to London to do my PhD in neuropharmacology at King's. And then this was all in like preclinical research. And then in 2012, I decided that I'd really had enough of preclinical research and was much more interested in clinical research. So my focus has always been in neuroscience and in particular in neurodegenerative diseases. I got into that from a particular personal connection with my grandmother had dementia, and I became, equally fascinated by the disease, but also could see, how it really took over her life and what impact that had on her. And I just felt genuinely curious to explore that and try to contribute in some way in research into this area. And so I was motivated to then also pursue clinical research, and that's what took me to Germany. So I moved to Magdeburg. So for those that don't know, it's a small city just west of Berlin. And I worked there at the German Center for Neurodegenerative Diseases and did a postdoc there for just over 7 years. And so this was focused on clinical imaging, so using MRI, other imaging modalities to develop biomarkers. And that was in aging, but also to focus on early Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. And then after that, I became a principal investigator at the University of Magdeburg, where I then built my own group, focusing on very similar areas. So particularly Alzheimer's disease, focusing on clinical imaging, and continued to be a PI for about 5 years until I actually realized, that maybe I was sort of on the traditional path towards a professorship, but then I'd really got to a point where I actually started to question whether that was really for me. And the interesting point was that, that wasn't an overnight decision to do something else. It actually started off as just having little inklings that, maybe this isn't quite right for you. Maybe you're curious about other things. I initially suppressed those thoughts for quite a long time, where I'd really sort of had told myself that, really everything would make sense when I became a professor. And those sort of thoughts had really kind of developed where I reached a point where I had to really acknowledge that perhaps, I was interested in other things, or at least I needed to explore what else, I could do and how I can apply my experience knowledge to other things. And so that led me to, whilst I was in academia, to explore alternative options. So I was always interested in startups that, took research and then tried to apply that research to develop solutions. So I worked for a spin-off company, Neotive, whilst I was in academia, focused on like scientific editing. I also did a few different things there. And then that also really motivated me to actually then go into a startup program where we had an idea for a solution for Alzheimer's disease. So with two others, where we then learned, how to try to set up a startup whilst also developing a product. And so those experiences really motivated me to then now go on my own journey with MJB Consulting to focus really on health tech consulting, so where I can apply my research background, but also really to help PhDs who are sort of in a similar position to me, who initially felt that they weren't quite on the right path and possibly knew what they didn't want to do, but wasn't really sure about what else to do. And that's really been the focus of how, I try to help PhDs at this moment in time, to really get them to use their time in academia to explore alternative paths. And just one thing, I think is important to take from this is that, academia is in fact the alternative path. And I'm putting that there not to put you off academia at all. I had an academic career for over 17 years, but it's to remind you that academia can be a risky career to go down, but also, that's just one path of many. And you can also use your time in academia to also explore your curiosity and think about how you can apply your skills and knowledge, to other careers. And so for me, a big component of that in terms of exploring your curiosity comes down to three core components. So that's really preparation in terms of not only, writing applications and seeing what's out there, but also spending a bit of time to think about what do you want to do? So thinking about your core values, those principles and standards that are really important to you, what you're generally curious about, and then really all acting on them. So reminding yourself that a career won't just come to you. Nobody's coming to save you, and it's to really take responsibility for that career and allow yourself permission to explore. And then related to that is really, your mindset, to think about, how you can actually think like a scientist and run experiments to collect data. Where it's like low risk, you're really just exploring your curiosity, seeing what, you can relate to. And then maybe that's not for you, but then taking that on board and running other experiments to really, identify crumbs that may be then the initial sort of seed for the next path that you will follow. Because ultimately, you're not really trying to plan your next 30 years of your career. You're really thinking about just the next step. And so maybe there are things that we can explore a bit in the seminar, and I'll leave it there and happy to try to answer some of your questions.
Okay, so let's just jump straight into some discussion. So you both kind of mentioned staying in academia or leaving academia for a different job, and we often view this as a bit of a dichotomy, that it's one or the other, and that's not necessarily the case. So yeah, maybe if you could both comment on that, and maybe Holly, if you would like to start.
Yeah, absolutely, Tracy. And I think this is a really good question to kick off with. I mentioned in my introduction that I'm currently writing a book, and as I've been doing that, I've been looking at some research been done in the UK and across the EU as well, as to where researchers have worked before they work in higher education, where else they might work during and after. And in one study of researchers across the EU who were currently working in a university, 24% of them had previously worked in the private sector. And we know as well, I mean, certainly in the UK, and I can see rumblings of this happening in other places as well, from a policy perspective, because governments believe that to drive innovation and productivity in a country's economy, we need skilled researchers to do that. We're seeing more this word porosity to describe researcher careers, which mean moving in between sectors, not just staying in one, like in academia or in another sector. So the first thing I would say on that is that evidence seems to show that careers are becoming more fluid. People are moving in, out, around, in between academia and other sectors, and that's being viewed as a positive thing. But what I also want to say on that as well is, for my book, the amount of case studies I've got from real life former PhDs and postdocs, who are not just doing one thing. Some have kept a foot in academia. Some have even got their company to release them one day a week or one day a fortnight to do some teaching in a university. So what I would say to people is, and I think this might link into a question we're going to maybe talk about later, is those of you listening, you might be coming from different places. Some of you might be really excited to explore a career move and moving into another sector. And if that's you, great. See it as a change, see it as a new start. But some of you might be a bit more reluctant, a bit more apprehensive. Some of you might not want to leave academia, but you feel like you've got no choice. And for those of you, I would say, don't think of it as a change. Think of it as continuity. What are you going to take with you from your academic experience into whatever you do next? I don't know if anybody's seen the Apple TV series Severance, right? If you move on from academia, it's not sever. It doesn't have to be severance, right? It's not the end of something and the beginning of something else. I would say, if you are feeling apprehensive, think about it as a continuity. Reflect. What have you gained from academia? What have you enjoyed about it? And how can you find things that will let you do those things you've enjoyed for more of the time? And you might find something that lets you do those things more often than becoming a senior academic would. So that's my first kind of message of trying to break down these barriers. It's not just stay or leave. It's not end and a new beginning. It doesn't have to be if you don't want to think about it like that. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that does. That's really, really good advice as well, because it can, at least for me, when I decided to leave academia, it did feel like an end, and I was starting something new, but it didn't have to feel like that. So that's really good advice, Holly. Matt, do you have anything to add to that topic about this academia industry kind of dichotomy?
Yeah, I can really relate to that feeling, and thinking that my career was like this fork in the road. I think, often the case actually that's just not true. And that's really, just in your mind. And I can think of many now examples where, you may find that you don't want to pursue an academic career and then you try something else, but, it doesn't mean that you can't go back. And actually, people do that. People will go back maybe after a couple of years of trying something. Some people may then have another career in industry for 20, 30 years, and then they go back towards the tail end of their career. I've seen that as well. And so, yeah, to pick on Holly's point, I think we all have to really embrace now that careers are becoming more non-linear, that we will, go up, down, sideways, and um, embrace that, there's not a failure attached to that, that actually, we're really growing as we do that. And, it's a great opportunity to learn and for our own personal development to really push ourselves in, different ways. And it's also exciting in a way. I don't say that lightly because the current job market is really tough, but it's also, an opportunity still when you think about what you really want to go for, to then use those kind of core principles like your values to really help navigate, what you want to do next.
Yeah, absolutely. It's also really great advice. So, okay, good. So we'll move on to a slightly different topic, and we're getting a few questions coming in. Just to remind everybody, please put your questions in the questions pane. Take advantage of having Holly and Matt online for the next half hour or so. And any question you have about staying in academia or moving to industry or doing a bit of both is very valid. So please keep typing. So we will move on to a kind of related topic, so more about your identity. So we quite often hear that people do have a lot of their identity associated with their job. And if you leave academia, who are you? Or the other way around, if you've been in industry for a long time and you go into an academic or teaching setting, how does that fit with where you've come from? So do either of you have any tips on how to manage that as we're trying to switch between jobs and roles?
Yeah, definitely. I can take that one first, Tracy, because I want to go back to what I was saying earlier about
Great.
any kind of career change or move, really, not viewing it as not viewing it as an end, but viewing it as a form of continuity. So I'd say, yeah, I talk to a lot of researchers who, um, you've spent a long time um, becoming an expert in a particular field, and when someone asks you, oh, who are you, what do you do, you've probably got a default answer to that, and it's probably deeply attached to the research that you've been doing. So to think of yourself differently from that can be a challenge. But I think, Matt's been talking about core values, I've been talking about continuity. What I would encourage people to do if they are worried about who or what they will be if they move away from academia, from neuroscience, or from whatever your research field is to instead just break that identity down a little bit and think, okay, if I'm a neuroscientist, what does that mean? It means I'm a problem solver. It means that, whatever it means for you, what are the core elements of being a neuroscientist that you feel are like your standout points and you feel are your best bits, right? And then it's thinking about how will you then continue to use those, because that'll still be you. You'll still have those skills. You'll still be that person. You'll just be applying them in a slightly different setting. So I think that's difficult to move from saying I am a neuroscientist to I'm someone who is really good at applying a rigorous approach to solving problems. It can feel a bit vaguer, but I think it's a way of breaking down what that academic identity actually means for you and seeing it as something that you can take with you and move and actually apply to different settings, all the while still being you, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And what the academic identity will mean to all of you will be different. For some of you, it will be a teacher, someone who instills in people a love of a certain subject. For some of you, it will be a writer. For some of you, it'll be a combination of lots of different things, but it's identifying what those things are to you. And then the next step, which we might talk about a bit later, is okay, well, how do I then find out where else I can apply that?
That's a really good way to look at it. And from a personal perspective, I left academia 10 years ago, and I still describe myself as a scientist. Just because I'm not doing research every day, I'm still applying my scientific skills in the job that I do. And I think that's a really good advice to think about what it means to you, to be an academic or a non-academic. Matt, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would just say, that your identity is not constrained to academia. And I think that's really important when you consider your other options, where, it's really about giving yourself permission to explore. Because I see that in quite a lot in myself, where it's like, you've invested time into this career, and it's tempting to think, you have this whole sunk cost, where it's like, what is the cost of leaving academia? Maybe I should just stay where I am. This is all that I know. But if you actually take a bit of time just to think about that, and this is also why maybe we'll move on to this, but why it's so important to speak to people outside your inner circle, because they get you just to think differently. If you only speak to people within, say, academia, your circle, people have the very similar mindsets. But when you start talking to people that have actually made that transition, they can really inspire you. You may not go and follow their path, but it's like, oh, wow, yeah, I've got a very similar background to them. Their circumstances may be different, but it's really cool how they made that transition. And I'm really curious about now what they do. And so, when you can have like coffee chats, or, even listen to podcasts and read books about how people have made that transition, it really gets to think you differently about not just what I'm doing in the lab, but also how I can maybe apply that to different contexts.
Sounds good. Thank you both for your insight on that topic. So now we're going to have a slight change of topic. A question from one of our listeners today, who is in marine biology, which, interesting side note, we were talking about fish and aquatic mammals right before the webinar started, so that's a kind of nice relation there. So our listener is just finishing a PhD in biology and looking for a job, wanting to stay in academia, so in teaching and research, but is a little bit limited by location due to family situations. So would you have any advice for a new graduate trying to make their next steps in the world when they are limited by location in an already narrow job market? So I guess it's about this balance between family life and work life that people struggle with frequently. So maybe Holly, do you want to step in first on that one?
Yeah, am I addressing this specifically from wanting to stay in wanting an academic job?
This is for our question asker is looking for a job in academia. So if you could get specific to academia, that would be great.
Yeah, so if you, this is important, I think, acknowledging that if you have got location restrictions, and it also does raise a bit of it does raise a question about equity and accessibility of academic careers and who's free to move where the jobs are and who aren't. And there's a lot of intersectional issues in there that I think are important to acknowledge. And some really interesting research that I've read recently for the book around those intersectional issues, especially about how this impacts women and how it impacts researchers of colour as well, who we know are more likely to have more complex caring responsibilities. Anyway, but that acknowledged and out of the way, what I would say is, like anything, do not wait until the jobs are advertised. If you're sat hanging around waiting for postdocs or academic jobs to pop up on a job platform or a job board, I feel like you're already a step behind. So what I would probably say for you is understand your radius. So how far can you travel? What are the institutions? What are the academic organisations, university centres within that radius? And you need to focus on building a network within those, really. So start local, have you got an opportunity to be written into a grant or a bid with an academic you already know, potentially as a first step? But really making sure that people within your kind of radius know who you are, know your work, and that you're out there. I think that would be my first tip. And I'm not sure. I know I do have quite a UK spin on this, but it's just the fact that, responding to an advert for, say, a postdoc isn't the only way to do it. There are ways to catch the fish. Why do we keep coming back to fish?
I know, it's the
Catch
theme
the
of the
fish.
day.
Catch the fish before it's advertised. And things like getting written into grants, being put into a bid so that you don't have to actually apply for the job. And if the if you can potentially set up a collaborative relationship like that, and your collaborator gets the funding, then you get the job. I think I would encourage you to explore those kinds of options as well if you know that you're geographically limited.
Okay, great. And we have a round of applause from our question asker. So I guess your answer was great, Holly. Matt, would you like to add anything to that in terms of advice and that specific situation?
Yeah, I think I would just explore the working setup there. So whether there's also, options for flexibility based on your circumstances in terms of whether, you need to actually be in person there every day. Some people can offer more flexibility that depending on the work. So they mentioned teaching. So presumably that's predominantly a teaching related role. Are there options, to do some of that remotely? I guess if you're running a lab as well, it's difficult to do that entirely remotely, but still maybe some wiggle room there. So I would suggest, don't like self-reject yourself before, exploring what flexibility there is there in the role.
Could I just add something to that? Because
Sure.
Matt's is a really good point. He makes a really good point. And that's, remember that sometimes role conditions aren't as black and white as they seem on the page or on the advert. And I've seen a lot of situations where these things can be negotiated. To open it up, have a conversation about what might be possible, because for the right person, an employer, academic, industrial, public sector, whoever they are, they might be flexible for the right person. It might just not be obvious from what's written on the advert that you've responded to.
Yeah, but that's also really great advice as well. And it can be quite tricky if you have other constraints. As we know, the job market can be a nightmare to navigate anyway, but if you have constraints such as location, then it can be a little bit more tricky. So that's great. Thank you, both of you. I hope that answered your question, Garrett. That was a really good question. So we have a few more questions coming in. I'm going to take this one from Michaela next because it's kind of related. So first of all, thank you for the informative session. So again, thank you guys for being online. So she's interested in an academic career and is wanting some advice on how to pursue a postdoc position. So it's kind of related to the last question, but not necessarily with the same constraints. So any kind of top tips for looking for a postdoc, specifically a postdoc research position? Maybe Matt, do you want to step in with that one first?
Yeah, sure. So I would initially say, what are you looking for a postdoc, and why do you want to do a postdoc? I think it's an important question to ask yourself. Is it because it's the next logical step, or is it because you want to actually pursue a certain research question, you actually are interested in a particular research institution or lab? I think it's helpful to be clear on what you want to get from that postdoc. And similar with your PhD, not just think about the lab that you're going to, but also the environment that you're in. So it's a bit different to a PhD because the postdoc, although it isn't always turns out to be the case, but in theory, that's meant to be a transition phase for you then to potentially become an independent researcher. And so are there opportunities, for you to grow in that role? And so if it's actually going to be something very similar to a PhD, is that good for your own professional development? Or, can you go somewhere where, may take on a bit more responsibility? Maybe you're not working for such a big name, but they will give you more responsibility, and, that will ultimately be helpful for your own personal development. So I think the question is really what you want to get out of that, whether that's a stepping stone towards something else, or you're actually thinking more long term going down the academic route.
Great, that's really good advice. Would you have anything to add? And we also have a round of applause. I'm assuming you guys can see the reactions too, but I'm just going to tell you that you can see them. Yeah, okay, great. Holly, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, just to reiterate what Matt said, and also just to add, I see a lot of researchers who can get trapped into thinking that an academic career is just a series of applying for jobs. Like, oh, so PhD, next steps postdoc, next steps assistant professor, etc. And I'd say instead think of an academic career as a strategy. It has to be strategic. It has to be a process where you develop a strong, we've already talked about identity, a sense of who you are as a scholar, as a researcher, and as an academic. Because only when you know that can you sit in front of a panel later on, going for those more permanent jobs, and say what the value is to the university in taking you. How, for example, what creative teaching methods can you train your colleagues in? What kind of what collaborations does your experience mean you can set up? And a postdoc is one of the first steps in establishing that academic identity, so choose wisely. Not all postdocs are equal. Your experience with say a PI who's very experienced, and who really is kind of moving towards the end of their career and handing a lot of things over to their postdocs, probably going to be very different from someone who's new, setting up their lab. You're going to get stuck in with helping them do that. So yeah, just to reiterate what Matt said, not all postdocs are equal, so knowing what you want to get out of it is really important. And it is not just a next job or something to do next. It is the next part of establishing who you are as an academic. So you want it to be a purposeful and intentional step within that strategy, I would say.
Great. Yeah, that's really great advice. Sorry, Matt, do you want to jump in again?
Yeah, I'll just add one thing from my own experience, so thinking about when I transitioned careers and moved to Germany, if you're considering that, then also just consider that it will take a while for you to get going. You're not only then dealing with, different research questions, learning new techniques and stuff, you've also got, a new language, different environment, different culture. That's a huge amount of change, and try to be realistic about what you're going to achieve early on. So first couple of years in my postdoc, I didn't achieve anything on paper. I had really nothing to show for the work I did. And so if you're looking to just do that for a couple of years, that's something to keep in mind, right? It's going to take a bit of time to get going.
Yeah, that's also really good advice. It can feel a little bit like treading water sometimes, I think, but it can be valuable. Okay, so we're going to take a question from Philip. It's a bit of a change of topic. So this is about moving to a job outside of academia, and it's actually quite an interesting perspective on it. So how do you avoid the feeling of it being a step down, so that in roles outside of academia that don't necessarily require a PhD, it's not necessarily valued so much? So this can lead to feelings of going backwards in terms of career progression. So do either of you have any advice on dealing with those kind of situations? Holly?
Yeah, Philip is it I'm
Yeah,
talking to with this one.
it is
Okay,
Philip.
Philip. Well, it sounds like that for you, Philip, having your academic experience valued is something that's really important to you. So I would not question that. If that's important to you, that's important to you, right? So what I would encourage you to do, Philip, is try to identify companies and organisations that have taken people from academia in the past, that have hired previous graduate students, postdocs, because then you've got some indication that they already value it. We know, so there's a really interesting research being done in Spain about where we see recruitment pockets. So this research by I think it's Garcia Quevedo et al. I think it is, and what they find is that if a company has people in it, hiring managers who have PhDs and academic experience, that makes them more likely to hire other people from academia. And also, if a company has a track record of previously hiring PhDs and postdocs, they're more likely to do that in the future. Now, that does mean we end up with these pockets in the labour market where some employers really understand the value of it and others really don't, and not that much movement sort of between those, an exchange of mindset. But I would say if that's important to you, Philip, if and potentially, you know, your working environment, working with other people who've maybe come from academia as well, use things like LinkedIn, company search, look for the company, go to the people tab, search in their PhD, search in their people who were studied at your university, and try to build up a picture of employers who are already going to value this. Because it sounds like to me, if you went somewhere and it's going to be a real challenge for you at the application point to explain your value, you might struggle later on if you feel like you're always coming up against that, if that makes sense. So I think what I'm trying to say to you, Philip, is it sounds to me like your working culture and values of an employer are important to you. So go with that and try to identify potential employers who are going to see your academic experience as an asset.
Makes sense. Definitely makes sense. Do you have anything to add to that, Matt?
Yeah, I'm just curious actually, Philip, with that question. So is that coming from you, or is that the feeling maybe that you get from others? Because I also have juggled that as well. So, you know, I'm almost 40 and now I'm really starting again, effectively. And it's interesting what responses. I mean, many people are, you know, are positive, but others not always. You know, they may say, you know, well, you're committing career suicide. You know, you are on this linear path, and this is actually a topic I really think about a lot. Really, how ingrained we are to focus on this linear trajectory. And actually, I'd recommend. I read a book recently by Anne-Laure Lecomte on tiny experiments, and I recommend you check it out. So it's really challenging this whole like perception of how really as a society we think about, you know, how we need to be on this trajectory towards something. But, you know, is that really what other people expect from us? Is that really what you want? So, you know, if you're thinking about your values and what you want from your work, it doesn't really matter what other people think. You know, so it's a lot of careers are very outcome centric, you know, that we want to get promoted, we want to go up the ladder, so to speak. But, you know, it's also about enjoying the process. So if you're fine with that and you're transitioning because, you know, you have a genuine curiosity about what you want to do, you know, what else matters really at the end of the day? You know, it's your career, it's not somebody else's.
That's also really, really good advice from both of you. I hope that that helps with for the question asker. Okay, so this is an interesting question actually from Francesco. So he had the opportunity to start a PhD in computational neuroscience and computer sciences, but now the supervisor is shifting to something different. So would you see it as a viable option or negative to switch PhDs? So to stop that PhD and start a different one, how would that be perceived by employers, for example? And to Holly, you're unmuted, so maybe you could start. So.
Yeah, I mean, my most of my knowledge and expertise is the transition into other sectors. I definitely don't
Mhm.
think I'm an expert in how academia necessarily
Mhm.
works, and I only worked in academia briefly myself. But to take that question about
Mhm.
would changing PhDs, how would that look to employers? I think the only first response I have to that is you're in control of that narrative.
Yeah.
Um, so just have it straight, have a narrative straight, have a narrative set up that if an employer challenged you on that, um, you could tell a story as to why you changed that resonates with them. Right.
That makes
So
sense.
if something like, well, um, not presenting it as a passive thing. Well, I thought I was doing this, then this changed and this
Mhm.
changed, and I got caught up in it. Just try and make it a purposeful narrative that will resonate with that employer and shows, oh, well, actually, the fact that from the first PhD, I realized I enjoyed this more. I
Yeah.
wanted to, develop myself in this particular way. That's why I made the change. And that's also now why I'm applying to continue my career with you, because I know that you offer the opportunity for me to to further move in that direction I want to. So I would say, yeah, don't forget you're in control of the narrative.
Yeah, I think that that's really good advice for other situations as well. And having spent quite a long time in academia myself, I wouldn't view this as a particularly negative thing to switch, as long as you have good reasons for doing so and that it fits with your motivations,
So,
as Holly said.
yeah.
So
I dropped out of university the first time I went. During in school, I was told constantly, "You're going to love university. You'll thrive there. You'll go and you'll never want to leave." And I went
mm,
and I hated it. But it was the formative experience of my
mhm,
life. It taught me so much about the importance of environment, setting, and values. And I've never been questioned on it. It's
yeah,
never come up as a negative thing because I'm so insistent about how it did actually teach me to take control, be decisive. Yeah.
yes. Yeah, no, it's really, really, really good advice. Matt, do you have anything to add to that? Having spent quite some time in academia?
Yeah, I'd be curious as to what stage they are and how far into the
Yeah.
PhD. So, if you already put 2 to 3 years, plus into that, is that a question if that's the best option for you? You've already invested a lot of time in that. Are you actually closer towards finishing this PhD rather than starting another one? And also what then kind of options are available to you. So you mentioned the supervisors transitioning, but then that would be a different topic, new learning potentially, other options, to finish up your PhD where you are with potentially the support from another supervisor. There are usually, some kind of options there to do that. Obviously, like funding will be an important aspect there, but maybe you can even split your time. I mean, your supervisor, I think, would still be able to support you in some way, even if you stayed on the same topic. So I'd just be, I would suggest exploring all options before potentially, deciding to start a whole new PhD.
Yeah, yeah, it's also really good advice as well. Okay, I'm going to move on to another question. We are running a little short on, well, not short on time, but we only have a few minutes left, so I want to try and get through as many questions as possible because we still have some. So I have a question from Sonal, who started a career in academia in computer science with a PhD, and has also worked as a consultant, a trainer, as a researcher, and for nonprofit organizations, but now wants to go in a project management direction in industry. So, would you have any advice for navigating that path? And on a related note, how would one introduce oneself with such a varied background? So, how do you take advantage of that varied background going into another pathway like project management? So, Matt, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, so I mean, it'd be interesting to know in what kind of industry that they want to do that, whether that's also overlapping with
Mm,
their research, because I think that seems a more like natural transition. And many follow that route. And I think, it's what I would say is relatable, to many people transitioning to non-academic careers, is to really think about the value you can provide to the employer. So, the classic, thinking more resume versus academic CV, and thinking about what transferable skills that you have and relevant experiences. So, don't present yourself in the academic definition of value, but really understand the industry that you're entering and use their definition of value, and also use their language. Otherwise, you may not really, they, ultimately they're not so interested in your skills and experience per se. They really want, help with solving their problems. So, really try to think about, what's unique about your skills and experience that you can apply, to the role.
Okay, that makes sense. So we had an update from Sonal as well, so currently in computer science and wants to work in AI. So that's the area, so similar.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so Holly, anything to add to Matt's reply?
Yeah, I think project management does have its own vocabulary. On my blog, I've got there's an article there about I've done a PhD, does that make me a project manager? And it's all about just how to talk about academic experience using project management language. So it's just really reiterating what Matt said. In academia, we talk about a research proposal. Project management talks about a business case. We talk about academia talks about supervisors and funders. Project management talks about stakeholders. So I think if you are kind of moving role, and that role has a whole sort of as I said, theory and practice behind it, like project management does. Learn that language, and also see if I don't know if you have an accreditation like a Prince 2 or something like that, but if you don't, there's plenty that you can access online for free to still be able to translate your experience into their vocabulary and terminology.
That's really good advice as well. So I'm going to take one more question. I'm sorry for any of you who don't get your questions answered, but you could join us later. We're doing this again this afternoon, so you could join again if you want to ask more questions. But if you both could provide a quick answer to this one, I think it's quite an important topic. So the question is from Samantha, and she's applying for jobs after a PhD, and a lot of companies are recommending junior entry-level jobs because of a lack of industry experience, but she feels she could do more because of the skills we gain in the PhD. So how do you kind of balance getting across that you're not necessarily junior just because you're just leaving your PhD? So yeah, maybe Holly, do you want to do a quick couple of lines on that?
Yeah, I think it comes back to exactly what Matt said earlier. It's showing the employer you can help them solve their problems. They might be asking for industry experience because that reassures them that you can adapt to working in an industry environment. So show them plenty examples of how you're not just blinkered, you're not just used to working in an academic environment. You can adapt. It's thinking about how would that industry experience reassure an employer? What are they looking for reassurance of when they ask for that? And try and use other evidence to reassure them about the same thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. So Matt, anything to briefly
Yeah, I
add?
mean, that's interesting. I haven't actually heard that option so much. It's more that, PhDs applying for roles, and then they're considered either overqualified or basically not lacking experience, relevant experience. So it's like, how do you get experience if you've only been in academia? And that's obviously a tricky one, but I think a lot of it comes down, to how we talked about how you present yourself, how you really understand how you can provide value to the company. But also the one we haven't talked about much is networking. So that can really help, where you start to make some connection, with those people, because a lot of it is, we think that all of getting a job is based on merit, but often the case is not just about that. It's also about the relationships you have with that person, and whether that person trusts you. And so if there are people within your network that can actually introduce you can refer you, that goes a huge way to get, foot in the door.
So Mary, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. How do I distinguish if I want to leave academia because I'm burned out, or if I want to leave because it's genuinely not the right career for me? So, oh, I know it's a big one. It's a big one to start with, but I think it's a good one, and it's one that many of us face. So, yeah, maybe does anyone want to jump in first? I can pick one, or does anyone have an answer? Matt, you want to go?
Yeah, that's such a good question.
Yeah.
So actually, just thinking about my own experience here, I think I came pretty close to burnout, and during that time, I particularly noticed that there was I sort of hit a wall with work. So I was always interested in research, but then it became a point where I really struggled to carry on working as I could. Like energy was very depleted, and the tasks that I would just do normally before all became sort of much harder to execute, and my kind of stress response to those tasks were also like very elevated. And so I knew that something wasn't quite right, and I felt that I was really just living from like one deadline to the next. And so from that point of view, I know I needed to like take some step out, and also spoke to some people to try to gain some support from that, and started to also wonder whether that's really how I'm approaching work, or whether it's the work itself. And that's a really tricky one to disentangle, and it likely is also a combination of both. So I think where I got from that is that I tried to make some changes to how I was operating. So be much more rigid in terms of the time that I would devote to that. I noticed that how I was working, I had very poor boundaries between work and life outside work. So I initially just tried to implement some stronger boundaries than that, and then to see if my like response was actually changed. And it did to an extent, but then that, to be honest, was also the starting point for me to also question whether this is really right for me. And so I think you've got to go on your own journey with that a bit. The only thing I would say is you don't just suffer in isolation. That if you feel that you're close to burnout, then really try to speak to somebody about it. Whether that's getting some professional support, but also your supervisors. It's important to say how you're feeling, so you can collectively try to address it, and also then make some changes to how you're working, so you don't just continue on the same.
Yeah, it's really, really good advice. Yeah. Holly, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think I do. This is for Mary, was it? And I'd say
Yes.
this might sound like I know that not everybody has the privilege to be able to build this in to the situation they're in now, but rest, take some rest, do what you can, build up a cushion of savings or something like that to give yourself a bit of a rest, and take like clear your head and get yourself into a kind of bit more of a level where things can settle. I just want to read out the last blog post I put out was with a researcher that I worked with, who kind of jumped straight from a postdoc into a senior job in a non-profit, and he did burn out, and he said, for him, he says, for me, moving straight from PhD and postdoc to a senior job was not the best idea. I hadn't recovered from the pressures of academia, but I jumped straight into a senior job that was equally pressured. I underestimated the power of rest. Um, and yeah, so I would say do what you can, even if it's just for a few weeks, to take some time out, settle, and see where your brain goes then. um, to yeah, give yourself some space. I think is the best thing I can suggest.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
really, really tricky one. I remember being there myself. It's quite sad that a lot of us end up in that position where we're not quite sure if we're just burnt out or if we really need to change. And yeah, I think I fortunately tried both of the approaches that you guys suggested to kind of change my approach to a few things, see if it made a difference, and to try and take a bit of time out. And I think that this isn't particularly helpful for some people maybe, but at some point I just knew that was the right decision, and going through that process of trying to change it myself, and then yeah, and I was also worried about whether I was making the right decision. Sometimes you just have to do that, right? So yeah, it's really, really tough. Okay, I thank you for your answers on that. We've got questions flooding in, so I'm going to just try and work through them in order. So this is for both of you. From who did you talk to, or where did you seek advice when you were at key decision points in your career? And this is from Nick. So who did you seek advice from? Because we don't all have a Holly and Matt to talk to. So what did you do? Maybe Holly, do you want to go first with that one?
Yes. Good question. Who did I seek advice from?
Hmm.
Initially, I didn't. Initially, I made a decision to try things out. And I thought, well, I'm in a university environment already. I can see people around me doing different roles within a university environment. How can I get a little taster of that? So I think what I did was try things out by getting those part-time jobs that I mentioned, and just finding out as much as I can about what people did. So there was that as a bit of a research gathering exercise. I did actually see a careers advisor though, and it was quite pivotal for me because she did become a bit of a role model. I'm still in touch with her now, Lucy. I ended up working with her for a few years as well. And that was the first time I really sort of met someone and thought, I can see myself doing what you do. So as well as going to her, I say Lucy was useful. I don't even really remember the advice she gave me, but I remember how she made me feel in seeing her as an example of someone who'd um, carved this career out for herself, still had that role of being a teacher, a mentor, and the things that you could be in academia, but in a slightly more academic adjacent role. Um, so for me, it was less getting advice from people, and it was more seeking out models, seeking out people that I could look at and think, yeah, I see myself doing that. Another example was when I went to a project management course during my PhD. Don't remember anything about the project management course, but the guy who ran it, I stayed behind afterwards and asked him how did he get into training and development. So that's what I did really. I took these opportunities, got these little part-time jobs and did training, really just as an opportunity to grill people about their jobs, and come up with these examples of people where I was like, I'm not 100% sure what I want to do, but what I want to do looks at something like what Lucy and what Vince do. And when I had that, that gave me something to go on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it kind of does. Yeah, that is good advice. Would you have anything different to add to that, Matt?
Yeah, so I've definitely sought advice a few different stages in my career. I wouldn't say I've had like a official mentor of such, but if I've been struggling or just wanting to get, a bit of advice from someone, who's a few steps ahead of you and has made that, decision themselves. One that comes to mind was towards the end of my PhD, I thought to do clinical research that I would need to do medicine. So I remember considering that for a while and actually going back. I mean, the thought of it now, geez, doing another like degree. And fortunately, I spoke to another prof at King's, who was a clinical researcher, And he just said to me that of course you can still do clinical research without a medical degree. And that was very helpful. And I didn't know that person, previously, but I just sought him out based on his profile. And I've typically found that people are very open to talk to you when you have a question. Another example was when I was then in Magdeburg and interested in startups. I knew a few PIs that had managed to also have their own spin-off companies. So I talked to them how that really worked, how they managed to juggle that, with all of their other academic commitments. I was also interested in consulting. So then I would look at startups that were working like on the intersection of academia and industry, potentially like requiring like academia to do like clinical studies and seeing how I could be potentially useful to them. I particularly think of a Parkinson's startup in Berlin, where they had this like prototype, and then they wanted some scientific expertise in terms of how they could test it in a clinical study. So then I just reached out to them and said, would you with some ideas, and then we just met and had a chat. So it was just also like a bit like Holly was saying, like just speaking to people, and then also trying to just learning by doing. As I mentioned, I managed to then work at a spin-off company for a little bit. I could then see, what the startup environment looked like, whether I could see myself in that, and that's really sort of how I've kind of navigated my sort of journey so far.
Yeah, sounds good. I think a key thing from both of you there is networking, right? You need to build a network that you can draw on when you need answers to these questions. So I think that's really really good advice, and nice to hear your personal experiences of that as well. So thank you. So we have another question come in from Sumaya. I hope I'm getting your name hopefully right. So this is quite an interesting one as well. So how to overcome the common notion that a PhD isn't equivalent to work experience when it comes to finding work in industry as a postgrad. So yeah, it's something that happens. So Holly, do you want to take a stab at that one first?
Yeah, I've got some thoughts on that one. So let me just go over the question. How do you get
Yeah.
around a
How
PhD
to,
not being
yeah,
seen equivalent to work experience? Yeah.
exactly.
Right. Okay. So the first thing I would try and do, if you can, is maybe not with employers in a field that you want to go into, but anyone else you might know. Let's say people who maybe you graduated with in your bachelor's degree, who are now further on in their career and might have hired people, for example. Anyone that you can, and ask them why they might ask for industry experience, and really understand why an employer would ask for that. And I think often it is for reassurance about a couple of different things. So I think, why would an employer ask for industry experience? Well, number one, they want to know that you can operate in a commercial environment. Right? They want to know that you can keep up with the pace of work. They want to know that you are willing to work in a team towards a shared goal and not just be focused on your little niche thing, which might be a perception of what PhDs do, right? So do what you can to build evidence, whether that's in your PhD research itself or outside, so that you can help convince an employer that you can work in a commercial environment, you can multitask, you're not just a subject specialist, you can collaborate with others, and you can work at pace and work on lots of projects at the same time. So I think basically my answer is, understand why employers are asking for that. What is it they're looking for reassurance of, and try to give them that reassurance by showing them evidence from other parts of your experience, that you're not just a brain on a stick, and you can operate in the environment that they need you to. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Matt, would you like to jump in on that one as well?
Yeah, I don't think I have much to add to that. I think it's also then about, as we discussed in the first session, how you present yourself. I think, there's a reason some people have that, viewpoint of academics, and often that's because academics present themselves in a very academic way. They come with publications and, grants, etc. And then that's just not, hitting the point sometimes for, companies and other employers, because they're also then looking for, your skills and relevant experience and how you can apply value. So in that case, it helps to really make like a skills audit and like go through your experiences and think about the different things that you've done, because you typically find out there's much more than you think. And then you can start, using the language that your industry speaks in. So, for example, project management, I think PhDs have all gained some experience in that. So think about how you've managed your PhD, and there are likely examples where if you're a postdoc as well, you've likely also potentially managed budgets and also working with other stakeholders, etc. And then you start like picking out relevant experiences, that rather than just presenting yourself in, okay, I got X number of publications.
Yeah, makes sense.
Oh, can I just add something? Sorry,
Yeah,
there's another post on my blog about this, and we talked about it this morning, which is if you do feel like you're coming up against these problems of employers thinking your PhD doesn't count as work experience, or trying to get you to apply for more junior roles, and you feel like you a bit more qualified than that, is try to target employers have employed people out of academia before. There's really easy ways on LinkedIn to do that. Search for a company, go to the people tab, search PhD. Do they have former PhDs, former postdocs on their staff already? Understand what companies researchers from before you have gone to. And that's a way of trying to target employers where you might come up against this less. Because those employers might have PhDs themselves and therefore more likely to see the value in it. So I would say, yeah, look, really do some research and find out companies where hiring managers might have PhDs themselves, because it might be an easier sell.
Yeah, that's also really good advice. We have another question that's kind of related, so I'm not sure how much you can add to this, but it's nice to see a similar problem from the other side. So we have a question from Catherine, who's been a postdoc for 6 years and would like to transition to industry, but after applying for industry jobs for around 6 months, no interviews, and feedback from a hiring manager is that she's too senior for a senior scientist position, but other senior positions require previous industry experience, and she doesn't have the industry experience. And any advice on navigating that tricky situation? So being considered too experienced as a scientist, but not enough experience in industry. And I think the answers you gave to the previous question actually fit here as well. It's just a slightly different problem. But yeah, so just so all of our listeners know, it can happen from both sides. But do either of you have anything specific to add for Catherine's situation, or would it just be the same advice as the previous one? It's a tricky one.
Oh. It is. Sorry, go for it, Matt.
No. It's difficult to, interpret that a little bit, when they say you don't have experience, in terms of what they're really looking for there. If that's like a recurring theme, I think it also related to what Holly said, if you can then, are these positions, where they're asking for a PhD? I think that's also quite important, because if they're not, then, that's certainly harder to then find a way in, where they just may think that you're overqualified, or you will expect maybe a higher salary than they're prepared to offer. But then if you're quite set on going down this particular route, what options, what capacity do you have to get relevant experience that would then be my only other thing. So I guess if you're still in a postdoc now, is it possible to potentially through a collaboration gain industry experience? Is it possible to do an internship? Is it possible to volunteer? What kind of capacity you have, like financially, from a time point of view? Is that something to consider if it's important for you to pursue that path?
Yeah, makes sense. Holly, do you have anything to add?
I don't, not really, other than is
Mhm.
there a way you can get to the heart of what they really mean? Um, so are they in general saying you don't have the industry experience, and is that as far as the conversation's gone with them? Have you gone one step further and asked them, what is it specifically about the industry experience that's important to you?
Mhm.
Because I feel like then if you know that, then in future applications you can either focus on stuff you already have that might address that, or you can address it through what Matt just said and try to
Mhm.
see, are there ways you can collaborate in your current postdoc? Are there ways you could pivot, maybe do a short like something short in academia, or a secondment with a industry
Mhm.
partner to get that? But my my careers advisor brain says that, oh, you don't have the industry experience, what does that mean? What's the next question? And to me it is, what does that industry, why is that industry experience important to you?
Yeah, that's a really good place to start. And I know it's sometimes difficult to get feedback from hiring managers if they've already kind of decided they don't want to interview you or whatever. But yeah, trying to get some information or following up could be quite helpful for trying to tailor your applications. I think it's really, really important if you can talk to those people. Okay, good. Okay, we have a slight change of pace or change of topic, let's say. I'm going to try and distill this down to a question as a question from Christopher, who unfortunately is experiencing burnout at the moment. So sorry, Christopher, that you're in that position at the moment. So his question is related to how to manage all of the things you have to do after your PhD. So he says that he's spending a lot of time trying to apply for jobs and get work, but also not finding then time to do anything on his research or develop his thesis into a monograph and so on. So balancing all of these things as you come to the end of your PhD can be quite tricky. So would either of you have any advice on how to manage that? And Christopher also asks if it's worth staying in academia. Is it always going to be like this? So is it worth persisting with trying to get those academic jobs? So that, yeah, there's quite a few things going on in that question, but I think that the crux of it is how do we manage that situation that's quite stressful right after our PhDs? So yeah, Holly? Oh, Matt, no, Matt, you're muted. I'm trying
Oh,
to work
oh.
out who's unmuted first, see who wants to respond. But go on, Matt, you go first.
Okay, so I can start. So I find it's helpful to think about the next step and job hunting, etc., as a job itself. And so I think it's important to really allocate time in your calendar where you have like time slots like you do for meetings, other potential deep work, or whatever it is you have to do, where that is the time that you'll particularly focus on that one thing. I think what I notice also talking to other PhDs, etc., that of course that it's a particularly challenging environment right now, and there's a lot of applications going out there without any response. But I think it's really important to still try to constrain, the time that you spend on that. To say, if that's say all you were doing, then still, make it 9 till 5. So the things that you're doing outside of that, where you can try to also focus on rest, do other things so it doesn't become overwhelming, and ideally try to start early. So I don't know what stage you're at now, but it helps to then do like small regular kind of intervals rather than try to leave it all to the end, where you also then have like a thesis, etc., to juggle. as well. But then still, try not to neglect one thing over the other because they're also equally important. So I think time management is quite an important one. And sorry, what was the second part of the question? So
Yeah, so is it worth persisting to try and stay
right,
in academia? Yeah, I know
yeah.
that's a huge one. But
That's a tricky one, and I think that's only one you can answer. But the thing I would say is, it doesn't get easier. So if you're approaching it that you'll be able to like work through those things, so that you'll have more time. That's really an illusion, and that's also something that I found myself wrapped up in. That the more work you do, the more work there is, effectively. So you create work for yourself, and so I would suggest that if you're really interested in academic work, it's more than about your approach to work and really defining boundaries for yourself and really trying to stick to them. So it's much more, kind of manageable to try and impose when you'll say this is now too much. I need to focus on my well-being. I need to rest, rather than say I will rest when the next deadline is passed or the next paper is off the desk, because then you'll just find that day never happens.
yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Holly, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, in a way, I don't necessarily think there is an answer. It's tough, and it's okay to say that it's tough. Um, and when things are tough, but again, it depends. Who was this question for? Sorry, what was the
Christopher.
Christopher?
Yeah.
Depends on you. It entirely depends on you, Christopher. If you feel like community helps, talk to people about this, because people around you might be experiencing the same thing, and you might just be able to offer each other a bit of solidarity, because I think sometimes we can be very used to thinking, especially in academia, that we're pitted in competition against each other, and if we admit a weakness or admit that we're finding something tough, then we're kind of singling ourselves out as struggling, as not good enough. And I would say, challenge that. If you need to talk to people, if you need to find a community and talk to people who are in the same boat as you, do that, because you may be able to get some strength just from doing that. But if I was working with you, Christopher, what I would do is I'd sit down with you and I'd ask you, when was a time in your past when you managed a heavy workload? When, if somebody said to you at the end of it, you know what, Christopher, by the end of these 3 months, you will have done this, 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 and this, and you would have said, no way. Think of a time when that's happened and talk through how you managed it. Break it down, what worked for you. Or equally, a time when it was a disaster and it didn't work. What didn't work and why? Because my temptation would be to say that what will help you is being rigorously structured, like what Matt said, putting time aside, compartmentalizing. This is your time for this is your time for that. But without knowing more about you, it's hard to know whether that is what works for you. So I would say, think back, when might you have been in a position where you've had a lot on your plate and it either went well? Why did it go well? How can you apply the same principles to the situation you're in now? One, when it went badly, why did it go badly? What do you need to do differently this time? So for me, that's more like coaching principles. For you, Christopher, rather than, oh, I've got something that I definitely know will work for you personally.
Yeah, that's great advice. Yeah, thank you both. Yeah.
Sorry, can I just add one thing?
Sure.
Just also thinking about this again, that I would also like ask yourself, why you want to pursue the academic route, why research is important to you and what you want to get out of that. So one thing I think that I noticed when I realized things weren't right was that I'd actually started focusing less on the process of doing research and more like on the outcome. I sort of become a bit more obsessed with becoming a professor. And when I'm a professor, this will all make sense. And this is like the common arrival fallacy, that you're sort of postponing your happiness now to this destination, and then it will all be worth it. But of course, you don't know that, and that's actually an illusion. That might actually be the case, but that's a real risk, right? Like, you're talking about a huge chunk of your career before you actually get to that point. And you know the statistics, or if you don't, but the statistics, of course, of actually achieving that are very low. So it's a high risk strategy. And so I would also, ask yourself, what is it that intrigues you? What are you curious about? And is that, worth the risk?
Yeah. Yeah, that's also really good advice. Thank you both. I hope that helps, Christopher. It's not a fun situation to be in when you're in that, feeling that way. So hopefully that helps with some practical tips for how to move forward. Okay, so we have another long question from Federico. So I'm going to try and distill this one a little bit as well. And the theme is switching topics. So partway through your PhD. So Federico's in the second year of a PhD in psychology, but would like to move into the neurotech industry. So this is quite a specific question that maybe Matt could take with his experience. So is a PhD something so far away from biomedical engineering helpful, or would it be better to switch PhDs now and do a different topic? So in the wider context, this is relevant for other people who may be at that point in their PhD where they're wondering if they've picked the right topic. So if any specific advice for Federico on is a psychology degree helpful in medtech would be useful. And generally, is it okay to switch topics? Yeah. So Matt, do you want to start with that one, given that this is up your alley, so to speak?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so to answer the first question, a psychology degree is definitely relevant to medtech. I mean, there's a really rife area of medtech at the moment, with the focus on mental health, with the focus on longevity. That's just like a few examples. Even, neurodegenerative diseases that I focus on, there's a whole, aspect psychology of that. So it's for sure relevant. I would question whether you actually need to do another PhD, to go down that route. There are other options to explore with that. So whether you can try to overlap, with the PhD that you're doing now to make it more kind of relevant to medtech. So whether that's through collaborations, so with your institution or maybe others, potentially, depending what setup you're there, whether your institute works with industry partners or whether you do this independent of your PhD, but it's something that you pursue on your own. I wouldn't say that necessarily means you have to do another PhD. And just like my example, I did a PhD, completely different topic, and then switched to a postdoc. So it's definitely possible to do that. And I wouldn't say you need to start from scratch again, but more try to think about how you can make that transition more gradually.
Yeah, that's great advice and applicable to other areas as well. Holly, would you have a more general approach to this?
I'm not sure really. Would I have a more general approach?
Yeah,
Just that, but the amount of people I'd say, I think sometimes if I don't have anything specific to say, I just kind of draw on the years of researchers that I've seen, right?
yes,
10
yeah.
years of people going through PhDs, postdocs,
Mhm.
academic careers, industry careers, careers that combine both. And I've never seen somebody who stayed in the same field the whole way, never. And the pivots I've seen people make um, are things that I think if they'd been told afterwards that that would be what they would do, they would say, no, no way. Oh, I didn't know I'd be able to do that. So I think it's just, I think sometimes we've just got a lot of general limiting beliefs, and this is why talking to people is so useful. Like, if especially in the academic route, don't just talk to the people around you. networking's useful for a reason, because the more stories you have, the more stories you've heard of people who's pivoted, changed, and things like that, the more belief you will have that it is possible. And I think, yeah, so I would say gather stories to challenge limiting beliefs you might have of being pigeonholed or being fixed.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good advice as well. And also, a lot of my peers didn't stay in the same topic. I've also had a very weird path. I started in sport and exercise science, then psychology, then cognitive neuroscience, then the technical aspects of EEG, fMRI. So my path is all over the place, and I would not have predicted my current job 10 years ago. So I think it's perfectly fine to have these doubts, but it's just how you manage them. So as Matt and Holly described, you need to just really have a think about what you want to achieve and how you can leverage on what you've already learned without, having too much of a drastic change. So that's really, really good advice. Okay, we still have.
I'm just, I'm thinking just very quickly. What one person I worked with a few years ago, he was a physicist, came from physics, but he wanted to move over into some kind of like health area. He's really passionate about moving more over into health. He now teaches health data science. He teaches it.
Yeah,
He doesn't just
yeah.
move into it. He teaches it. And he runs a conversion course at our university to help other people move into it, right? So he's
Okay.
kind of like inspired by his own wish to pivot. And yeah,
Yeah,
so that's like the best,
yeah.
one of the best examples I've got.
Yeah. I mean, I also was talking to an engineer PhD who then actually became an advisor for family offices and VCs, focused on like health tech. So, you can find some extraordinary stories out there, and what you find is that a PhD really, you're not constrained. You can really do whatever you want. It's more about thinking about what you want to do.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And we're running out of time, but there's a few other related questions from people coming from one background into another one. And how do you manage all those different threads and trying to find a job? So hopefully those answers to that question have also helped some of our other question askers that we won't get a chance to do. We have a few minutes, so I'm going to try and squeeze in one more question. I hope that's okay for everybody. So this is quite an interesting one, and one I hadn't thought of actually. So another question from Mary. Would you recommend applying for graduate schemes as a post-PhD, or are we too qualified and should we just aim higher than that? So yeah, have either of you encountered that before?
I have a lot, but that might be because I'm based in the UK. So
Okay.
Mary, I think you might be based in the UK too, if you're somebody who just added me on LinkedIn, maybe. But I mean, I think it depends on where you're based, but I can give a UK perspective where this does happen quite a lot. So yeah, I would say it depends what you want, and it depends what you want out of a next step. So there are three situations where I've seen PhDs use graduate schemes as a really great start in their career. The first one is where they want to make quite a change. So, for example, a Roman historian moving into project management in the public sector, um, or I've had a biomed scientist moving into tax consulting. So they do. One reason you might use them is if you want to move into something that um, is more general. You want to be something broader, move into something totally new. The next reason why some people could find them useful is they're quite structured. So if you feel like it will give you confidence to have structured training, and it also sometimes they're also rotational. So if you do a graduate scheme, you might go into a company and do 4 different placements in 4 different areas of the company. So if you still feel like you need that structure and you're still working things out about where you might be placed, then they're useful for that as well. And also for the lack of industry experience, they can be useful for that. So, but it depends what you want. If you want structure, training, confidence, that kind of sort of, that sort of start, then I think they can be useful. But if you want to move into something that's linked to your research and you want to be using your expertise at a high level, then I'd say probably not. I think it entirely depends on what you want. And I got a brilliant case study from a PhD who did a graduate scheme as a public sector one, and I remember him saying for him it exactly served the purpose he wanted of building a network, learning more about what he enjoyed, and actually giving him that insight to where he really wanted to position himself longer term.
Yeah, sounds
But
really good.
it depends. And what I've also seen is PhDs progress actually quite quickly. I know a lot of people say, oh, but if I just go into something and I'm with a load of bachelor's graduates, then my PhD's wasted. Well,
Yeah.
not necessarily. Give it 3 years and you might feel quite differently about that. But it depends. It depends what you want. Yeah.
Great, thank you. You have anything to add to that, Matt?
I don't know. I would think
Yeah.
Holly totally
Pretty
covered.
comprehensive answer.
Yeah.
Great, thank you both. So we are really running out of time. So anyone who's asked a question that we didn't answer, I'm sorry we didn't get to it. I hope that the answers that we had for other questions kind of cover some of it, and we've provided enough useful information. But if you want more, so Holly and Matt both have a lot of resources available for you. So if we just start with Matt, he offers career clarity sessions, which sound like a great thing to be able to do if you're trying to navigate your next steps. And these are one-to-one sessions to support PhDs and postdocs navigating career pivots, which it sounds like a lot of you have in mind, actually. There's quite a few people mentioning pivots in the questions. And Matt also runs workshops for PhDs and postdocs. So crafting your career path, one experiment at a time. So thinking about your career from an experimental mindset, which can be quite helpful for scientists, and also LinkedIn for scientists, which is also quite useful. So a few of the answers to our questions really highlighted how having a network is really important, and having people that you can reach out to is really important. If you want to get in touch with Matt, his LinkedIn is being posted in the chat, so you can find him via that link. From Holly, as we already mentioned, she has a really excellent blog, and she already mentioned a few topics that are on there already, so you may already be following that up as we speak. The link will be in the chat for you to follow. So the blog is called Postgradual, and there's some really great topics on there, so it'd be worth having a browse. Holly also offers workshops for universities and scientific institutes or other organizations. So if there's someone at your university you can talk to about having workshops at your institution, then get in touch with Holly. You can contact her via the contact on her website or via LinkedIn. So both of those things will be in the chat as well. Also, as Holly mentioned, she's got her own book coming out next year, which sounds like it would be very helpful for a lot of you. So hopefully you're not just there yet, and you can hang on for Holly's book to help you through it. And she's also co-authored a chapter in a very interesting book that the link is going to be in the chat for that as well. And that is available to pre-order already. Let me just remind myself of the title. So yeah, Job Hunting for the 21st Century, which actually sounds really helpful for a lot of us. And it's a comprehensive guide for the modern PhD. And Holly's chapter is on using generative AI for your job searches. So that should be really interesting. As we said, it's available pre-order, so follow the link that's in the chat. If you would like more from the Brain Products Academy, so if EEG is your specialty, we do have a few workshops coming up. So one on data analysis in Hamburg. However, that's just sold out, so you need to sign up for our newsletter to find out when the next one's going to be. We also have a hands-on acquisition and data analysis workshop that will be running here in Munich, and we'll be running the same workshop in Brisbane in Australia as well. Then if EEG fMRI is your thing, so that's my thing, I will be also teaching on this workshop. We have two versions, one in the US in Baltimore and another one in Canada in Ottawa. That will be in August this year. So if that's something interesting for you, check those out. You can find all of these on our website, and also a couple of pre-announcements. So we will have an EEG and neuronavigated TMS workshop in Milan in September, and a MOBI, so mobile brain and body imaging, in Berlin in September and October. So if you sign up for our events newsletter, you find out when registration opens for all of our events, and you can get yourself signed up as soon as you can. So that really just leaves me to say thank you to everybody, most of all to our panelists. I think you will agree the advice from Holly and Matt today has been excellent, and I hope we've helped some of you navigating the next steps in your careers. And you can follow up with them via the links we've provided if you would like more information. I'd also like to thank our event management team. So we have Samantha and Liam in the background handling all this GoToWebinar. This doesn't happen on its own, so thank you to them for taking care of that for us today. And most of all, thank you to you, the audience. This only works if you ask lots of interesting questions, and you did that today. So we almost ran out of time, so that's really great. Thank you for your participation. So that just leaves me to say thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day or your evening, wherever you're joining us from, and goodbye from Munich and the UK, where Holly's based. So bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.